Hello everyone, Mike here with you guys once again, and I just finished playing a very old game. That's right. I just finished this game last night. I know I'm very much late to the party. Most of the people who have played this game have played it like almost 20 years ago now. Um, but I did not play. I did not game that generation. I did not game 6th generation, and games like this, Silent Hill 2, it's a very good reason why I should have gamed that generation. Because this is not only a horror masterpiece, but it's a masterpiece in entertainment in general. This is going to be a long one. I'm gonna give a thumbs way up at the beginning because I may have to spoil things to get into certain points. I don't know if I'm going to, but I might. And since this game is super old, I don't really feel as bad about it. Since most of you guys who are interested have probably played this already. But this game deserves credit in ways that people have not really talked about. Um, the praise that this game has gotten from others is very much deserved, and for the reasons that they said. But there's other reasons. There's more credit to give to this game than people are saying, and I want to get into a little bit of those. Um, the thing about this game that I love from a mechanics perspective is that it is my type of game. And what do I mean by that? Very exploration focused. Combat is there, puzzles are there, but they're not the emphasis. Um, it's mainly about exploration, and it's very slow paced, and I love that. That's my type of game. That's why, well, I wouldn't say Bioshock is a slow paced game, but it's definitely very exploration focused and less combat focused, which I love. It's one of my favorite games. I love exploration games. That's why I love Bioshock. That's why I love Metroid 2, and that's why I love Silent Hill 2. Or one of the reasons why. But my type of game is a game where you're allowed to breathe and just take in the atmosphere and just explore and look for things. It's just so much fun to do. I love that. That's one of the first things when I was playing this, that I was really happy about. It's slow paced in the fact that it takes a long time to get scary. It's creepy at first, but it takes its time to build up the fear level. But once you get closer to the end, you are panicking. At least I was. There were things that happened that pleasantly surprised me and I felt they were ahead of their time. For example, in the fourth major section of the game, you cannot carry your weapons. You have to drop them off somewhere. So you are disarmed. Not only do you not have weapons during that time, but you don't have your flashlight. So you have to be in certain areas to use your map. Let me tell you, the simplest enemies became very terrifying. They didn't become hard. Another thing I like about this game is that it manages to scare you without using high difficulty, and that is not something I can think another horror game has really done. I know the park, you can't die in the park, but it took away from the fear element there in that game. Here, that does not happen, because it's still possible that you can die, and it's in your mind, but they still manage to keep things easy, and that actually works to its benefit, because if you're having to repeat sections, it takes away from the surprise element, and so that can actually take away from the fear aspect in a game. Now, so that's a really brilliant move that Silent Hill 2 does, is it uses easiness to keep the tension going rather than difficulty. That is an amazing accomplishment in and of itself from a mechanic perspective. But the fact that this came out in 2001, and the section where you have no weapons, I really feel played a major role in the influence of games like Amnesia and Outlast. And most people talk about the third section as the best, as the scariest, but I honestly was more terrified than the last section because I was unarmed. And not only that, because I couldn't use my map, I was very disoriented and panicking whenever a simple enemy would show up. It seemed bigger to me somehow. because I was unarmed and without a map. So I was lost, panicking, and freaking out in a good way, not in a oh I'm angry way, which can diminish your gaming experience. It was in a good way because it kept me on edge. Another thing they did that keeps you on edge without raising difficulty is they make the controls less intuitive, but not to the point where it's unplayable. You can still get used to it, but when you first start playing, the controls are at least on 2D. 3D I can't handle. I can't do 3D controls, but the 2D controls I can handle just fine once I've gotten used to it. But when you first start and you're running around, even though the monsters are avoidable outside, you're still a little on edge because not only because of the atmosphere and the sound, but because you're not used to the controls. It's a simple gesture, but it works well, and it keeps you on edge. Another brilliant move this game does, from a mechanics perspective, is at the beginning of the game. It only gives you where you need to go, but every turn you try to make to get there is blocked. Until I went someplace random that I thought was random. Apparently, it turned out it was where I was supposed to go all along to get an item. It doesn't hold your hand and tell you where to go. You simply have to explore until you find out where to go. And if you explore enough, you will find out where to go. And the fact that they block you at every turn is normally an annoying mechanic that bothers me. I don't like roadblocks in games, but here it works effectively because it forces you to explore, and that is its main mechanic. Really good game design on that part for that. Alright, so those are the mechanical aspects of it, and I could probably go on a lot longer on them. But let's go to what people have been praising it for decades now, and that is story. And what I think and this is a good segue because I'm going from mechanics to story here, is I feel like this game was one of the early blueprints of the days walking simulator. Because there's so much emphasis on exploration and combat can be avoided most of the time, and there's only puzzles here and there, not a whole lot of puzzles, but they do break up the monotony of the gameplay. But the fact that this game is so exploration focused and story focused, I do feel like that has an influence that influenced modern walking simulator games. It's just that back then, I feel like developers weren't ready to take out the combat altogether. I feel the same way about Bioshock. I think Bioshock is another early blueprint for the walking simulator, because basically, what the walking simulator was what if we just take the combat all together and just leave the exploration elements? Can they work on their own? And based on what I've played and what people have said, that is definitely true because it's the strongest aspect of these games. So Silent Hill 2 deserves credit for having the early blueprints of a walking sim before walking sims even existed. Even though there's combat, even though there are puzzles and boss battles, it's not the main emphasis. And also, I like the difficulty flexibility. It's one of the earliest games. Many games in this generation didn't have this level of, and even games today don't have the same level of flexibility of difficulty that this game did. The fact that you can set your difficulty for both combat and puzzles. But this is one of the earliest games that I can think of where you can set the difficulty so low on the combat that it's a breeze to get through. That is not something that was common back then. And in a horror game, you think it would be antithetical, but because the story was so good and the atmosphere is nailed, and they do things to mess with your mind with the mechanics and the story, the lack of difficulty, like I said earlier, actually works to its game's benefit. It's able to freak you out without being hard. Anyways, I was going to go to the story. The story is really the heart of this game. And that is a word that you don't associate with horror much, especially back then. Heart. Horror with heart. And many horror storytellers don't want to put heart in it because they feel it's antithetical to the horror. But if you do it right, it works really well. The Babadook does heart really well. One could argue The Sixth Sense, even though it's not really horror, it does heart really well. Requiem for a Dream, totally pessimistic movie, but it did heart really well. Silent Hill 2 is a horror game that does heart really well. It's just as emotional as it is intense. It's emotionally intense and tense from a scary perspective. And that is uncommon in a lot of medium, horror with heart is a very uncommon thing and a very uncommon thing to do well. But this video game from 2001 managed to pull it off. Look, I don't think this game is not only a great horror title; it's a great title. It's in my opinion one of the best gaming experiences I ever had, and I wish that I had played it back in 2001 when it came out, because I think it would have had a much bigger impact on me. You know, when the PS2 was new and storytelling and gaming at this level of quality wasn't as common. This game is so ahead of its time. The storytelling, the emotion, and the mechanics. Um, this is so ahead of its time in terms of what it introduced and what it brought to the table. Whether it's having an emotional story or taking away certain mechanics that you relied on for so long and going to a section without weapons. That's normal today, but it wasn't back then in this era. So, any criticisms do I have? Some very minor ones. The first criticism is the safe puzzle with the combination lock. No matter what I did, it didn't work. And I looked up every solution, and I followed the solutions to a T. Still didn't work. So, minor gripe there, but it's optional. You don't really need to do it, especially on lower difficulty. And the other minor gripe I had was there's a moment when you go outside at night, and you can't see where you're going, and when there's enemies around you, it's difficult if you're trying to do certain things. Like I was trying to find one of the save points that I was at, but because I couldn't see, I had to keep going back to my map, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, map on map. It kind of took me out of it a little bit, and the problem was when I was surrounded by enemies, I couldn't concentrate on what I was trying to do, and that was a little annoying. In the fog, your vision is obscured, but you can still see the buildings if you get close to them. I couldn't see the buildings I couldn't tell what the buildings were when I was close to them. So it made it difficult, made it a little annoying to try to find out where I needed to go exactly, and where to progress. It's a mild, but again, that is such a mild complaint that I'm not even sure if it's worth mentioning, but I figured I'd at least, if I was going to give the game any criticism, it'd be that. But for the most part, now the acting is, for the most part, this game is pretty solid. But the acting, people have said it was bad, and I don't know if it was a sign of the times, because back then acting in gaming was not very good back then. But it also kind of reminded me of David Lynch's dialogue in a lot of his films. So it might have been intentional. I don't know. But I didn't really mind it. So that's really up to you how you interpret the acting in this. Music is beautiful. It's emotional. Again, like the story itself, it's very emotional and heartfelt, but also terrifying at the same time. Word of advice, though. Well, 2 words of advice. Number 1, I mentioned this earlier. Play with the 2D controllers, and for me, were much easier. You might not feel that way, but for me, 2D controllers was much easier than 3D controls. But also, play it at night. I was playing the 3rd section into daylight, and it did not freak me out as much as it should have. But I stopped, went back later last night, and wow, just the lighting and where you're at, like if you're playing in the dark or playing in the light, will affect the intensity of the experience. You will not be terrified if you're playing in the daylight, but if you're playing at night, oh man, especially when they start taking things you've relied on away from you. Very, very scary. And also, people have talked about the thematic elements. It's one of the things that's about great horror, is that a lot of the best horror stories have an element of realism to them in their darkness. Like, for example, Alien has symbolism regarding rape and forced birth. The Shining has a child abuse element to it, and so on. Babadook also has mental illness and abuse as well, because the Babadook is more about how them how parents want to strangle their kids, that type of thing. Silent Hill is no different in the sense that it also takes real world atrocities as an undercurrent for its supernatural storytelling. And that is something that great horror, the best horror in my opinion, has always done. And this is no exception. Overall, I highly recommend this. Definitely, it's a shame that the remaster was crap, because I feel like there's going to be an entire generation of people who will never experience this because they simply aren't old enough to remember to play it in its prime. But if you can get your hands on a PS2 or an original Xbox, and I think you can probably get the original version on PC now, play this. It's not only, even if you're not a horror fan, if you love great storytelling, play it. If you hate horror, then I wouldn't pick it up. But if you love horror, or if you love great stories, or if you just love games that are exploration games, pick this one up. Pick it up right now. It is one of the best games, not just best horror game, but one of the best games, in my opinion, of all time. I wish that I had a PS2 during this generation and I played it then, because this is a masterpiece in every way possible. Thumbs way up. I know I'm late to the party, but I just had to talk about this because this is really an influential and monumental game, in my opinion. It's like right up there with Bioshock, Mario, maybe not Mario Brothers, but definitely up there with Bioshock and Pac-Man, and definitely one of the very best. Anyways, that's all I got for you guys. I know this is a long video, but I had so much to say about it, and I will see you in a future video. Bye, everyone.